Hi friends, this is Taylor and Allison, and we are from the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, and we get to work with families at the museum, and we're going to show you some of our maker spaces, some pictures so you can see where we work, and then we're going to talk about some weaving.
So even though we can't be at the Children's Museum right now for summer camp, we're going to show you some pictures so you can see, because you might have been there before, and if you haven't, you'll be able to come and visit us later.
So you guys might recognize this place. This is the Children's Museum. And then we've got our makerspace here. This is the Make Lab, which is in our museum lab, and you can see a picture below the museum lab entrance as well. So this is one of our makerspaces for older kids. And then we've got our make shop in the Children's Museum. So in these spaces, we get to work with different tools and materials and processes with all of the different amazing visitors that come through our space. And you can see in this picture, lots of evidence of weaving hanging around sort of the perimeter of the room.
So for today's workshop, we're going to be doing some weaving with you guys. So like Taylor pointed out, there's some weaving examples in this picture, but we're going to show you some other pictures of what weaving might look like if you were to come visit us at Makeshop or Make Lab. So you might see we have some giant floor looms. So these are called rigid harness looms, and these are often used to make big collaborative pieces. So we have those scarves that hang from the ceiling that lots and lots of visitors work on for many, many days. But we also have, sometimes we do some paper weaving, like in this corner with the yellow piece of paper. We also do a lot of weaving on cardboard looms at the bottom picture, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. And you might even see some tabletop frame looms that we use, just made out of nails and wood.
So we're going to get started on some paper weaving, and then Allison's going to talk about the cardboard loom and weaving on that. So if you don't have your materials gathered yet, it might be a good time to kind of just pause this video, go grab the things that you need, and then come back and we'll talk some more. So what I have here is my my warp, my paper warp, and my paper weft. So these two words that I'm using are vocabulary words for weaving. So my warp here is a piece of paper. I'm probably going to say warp strings and weft strings, even though it's paper, just so you know, so that we're on the same page. But my warp here is connected at the top so that when we add in our weft strings, that it'll kind of keep things together. And then
helps it stay in place.
Yes. And one way that you can remember that this is your warp is to think about warp speed ahead. So your warp strings are always going to run top to bottom in a vertical direction. And then you've got your weft strings. And I've cut my weft strings from a piece of paper, just cut out strips. And one way to remember weft is left to right. It's kind of silly, but it's helpful. And your weft strings are always the ones running horizontally from left to right, left, right. So what I'm going to start with this first round is we're going to talk about tabby weave, which is also called plain weave. And it's a good baseline weave pattern to start with. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our weft strings and we're going to weave them into our warp strings, going over one string, under the next, over and under. So it's this alternating pattern of going over one string and under another and over and under. So I'll start that. And you can do this a couple different ways. So one really easy way to help you do this is to flip up each alternating string. And you can really only do this part with paper weaving. When you're doing weaving on the cardboard loom, which you can see on Allison's desk, is the strings are taut and in place. So they're tight and they're warped around the cardboard. So you can't flip those strings up. You're just going to go over and under. But with paper weaving, an easy way to start is to flip those alternating strings up, you guys can see, and you can slide your first weft string right in between that kind of fold area where your strings are flipped up and your other strings are staying down. And then you can push those strings back down, or the paper, I should say. Use your hand to kind of push your paper up, and you can start to see this pattern of where you can see your weft string here, but then your warp is on top, weft, warp, weft, warp, and so on. Now we're going to try the second way to go about this, which is how you would do weaving with string. We're going to leave all of our warp strings down, and we're going to take our weft. And something else important when you're doing just the tabby weave is that you're alternating how you start as well. So because I started this first strand going over the warp string, the second strand, I'm going to go under the first warp string. So I'm going to go under, and then you can see I'm going over this second string. I go under, over, under, and over. Oops, skipped one. So it's sort of this like crisscross basket looking pattern.
It almost makes it look like a checkerboard.
Checkerboard is a good way to think of it too, yes. Do one more strand with you guys. So remember, when you're starting your next weft string, you want to go whatever you started with, or whatever your last strand started with, you want to alternate. So I'm going over again. And you guys have the option too to make your warp and weft strings different thicknesses. If you wanted to make really, really skinny weft strings, you could cut these even thinner, and it's going to make your weaving look different. So it's up to you how intricate you want to make it. You can use different colors. And for this, you could see that I had this paper, which is sort of teal and white, but this paper is all over color because I wanted to see what the pattern would look like. And I just used recycled artwork. I think we're ready to talk about cardboard looms.
Yeah. So I'm going to show you guys the same steps that Taylor was doing with paper, but we're going to start on our cardboard loom. So I think Taylor's got a cardboard loom she's going to work on making so she can weave alongside with us. But so just how Taylor had her warp strings that go up and down, that warp speed ahead, our cardboard loom has the same one. So you can see I've got my piece of cardboard, and I just used an old box. So mine is just made out of a cereal box. But I've got my warp strings all ready to go, and then we're gonna go ahead and to do a tabby weave, we're gonna start with a piece of whatever yarn you want. So I've got this turquoise yarn I'm gonna use. So you're gonna start, if you don't have a piece cut yet, you want a piece that's about as long as if you were to hold your arm all the way out. So go ahead and cut a piece of yarn that's at least that long. And what we're gonna do is you can either use a couple different tools to help you guide your string as you're going over and under the weft string. So you could use a tapestry needle. So this is just a very dull, it's not sharp, it's made out of plastic. It's similar to a sewing needle, but it's got a really big hole at the top, so that way you could fit some thicker string and yarn in here. So you could use a tapestry needle if you have one. If you don't, that's totally fine too. What we want is we want something that's going to help us because our string end is going to start to unravel a little bit, and we want something to help hold it together and help guide it through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a piece of tape. So I've got some masking tape here. You could use masking tape. You could use some Scotch tape, just the clear tape. But you want to take just a little piece, and we're going to take the end of our string. You can see my string is already starting to unravel a little bit, so this will be really helpful. But we're just going to take our tape, and you're going to tuck it right at the very end. You're going to tape it around, and then all we're going to do is we're going to take the tape and we're going to kind of roll it around our piece of yarn so that it adds a little bit of structure, and it's kind of going to be like a little plastic bit on the end of a shoelace. So at the end, you should end up with a piece of yarn that's got a little tiny bit of tape that'll make things a little bit easier to go over and under with. So once you have that, you're ready to start weaving. So we've got our warp strings are ready. Now we have our yarn that will be our weft strings, and we're going to move these strings from right to left and left to right. So what we're going to do to start is we're going to take the end of our string, and just like Taylor did with her paper strips, she went over one and then under the next one, over, under, over, under. So we're going to do the same exact thing. So we're going to take our string, we're going to go over our first one, we're going to lift up our second warp string, we're going to go under that string, we're going to pull our yarn through, we're going to go over the next one, over the third one, under the fourth one, over the next one, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, and go all the way until you get to the end of your cardboard loom. So once you get your string, your weft string, to go over, under all of your warp strings on your cardboard loom, you're gonna go ahead and we're gonna pull that piece of string of yarn. You're gonna pull it all the way. You wanna save a little bit of a tail. So you can see over here on the edge, I've got a couple inches. So I've got the length of a finger. We're gonna leave that bit of string just hanging off to the side. So one thing for weaving is you can see the bottom of our loom is all the way down here, but our string is a couple inches up. So what we want to do is we want to push our string and our new rows all the way to the bottom so that they get nice and compact and are right next to each other and they're nice and tight. So we're going to do, you can either use your fingers or you could use a comb. So maybe you have a plastic comb or a wooden comb. You could also just use a plastic fork or a regular fork. So I'm going to use the fork, but all you're going to do is we're going to use our tool to kind of pull that string all the way to the bottom. You can see that sometimes as you do this, if it's not too tight, it might get a little bit bumpy, and you can just kind of pull your string to flatten it out. But so now it's all the way at the bottom here, so we have our very first row of weaving. Now we're ready to do our second row. And so one important thing that Taylor did was you have to alternate, and you want to do the opposite of whatever you just did. So Taylor had multiple pieces of paper. We just have one really long piece of yarn. So we're going to keep going with the same piece of yarn that we had. We don't have to cut it or cut any new pieces. All we're going to do is we're going to take the end of our yarn, and now we're going to go the other direction. So we're going to start on this side this time. So last time, our first row, we went under this string, and so now we're going to want to go over this string. So we're going to start, we're going to go over, we're going to lift our next one, and we're going to go under that one. Then we're going to go over, and under, and over, and under, and over, and under, and you can do the same thing all the way until you get to the end of your row. Once you get all the way to the end of your row, you can go ahead and you're going to pull that string all the way again. And we don't want to pull too tight. So you'll see once I start pulling, I'm going to get this little loop here on the side where my turn is. And so I don't want it to be pulling too tight, because you can see when I pull too tight, my warp string starts to go in a little bit. So that's called creating tension, and we don't really want that. You want to keep it a little bit loose, so that way your warp strings stay up and down and don't start to get pulled inward.
Yeah.
So then we're gonna take our fork or our finger or our comb again, and you're gonna do the same thing. You're just gonna pull that row that you just wove through, and we're gonna bring it down and make sure that it's nice and close to that first row that we had. So now we have 2 rows of tabby weave. And so for weaving, you just keep going with that, and we're just gonna keep exploring that over, under process.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna add in, sometimes it's hard to keep track of the going over and under your alternating strings. So a trick that I did was to warp my loom with 2 different color strings. So what I did when I warped my loom is that I cut 2 colors of string, and when I warped it, I warped a blue string, and then I skipped a row and warped a green, and warped my blue again, skipped a row, warped my blue, and then did the same thing with my green string. So that way, when I'm weaving, I can think about it like I'm going under the green string, over blue, under green, over blue, under green. Pulling my thread all the way through. And I have a much smaller cardboard loom than Allison too. Something else to think about is like her weaving will look different than mine because it has more warp strings. So it will be wider, and mine is narrow. Now, since I went over the blue, now I'm gonna go under blue, over green, under blue, over green, under blue, over green. So this is a little trick to use if you're just a beginner weaver as well. And like Allison was saying, always be careful of that tension at the end of your, where you've looped your string at the end of your weaving.
And the nice thing about weaving is if you're not doing 2 different colors of warp string and you maybe forget which one you went over or under, if you end up doing the same ones, the same pattern over under the same strings, it's okay. It will just undo that last row and then you can just redo it, but it's not like it's messed up forever.
What happens if you want to change the color of the string that you're weaving and you want 2 different colors on your...
So if you want to switch colors, you'll just finish your row whenever you're ready to switch. So I think I'm just about ready to switch colors too, because I don't have enough. I don't know if you can see my tail is not quite long enough to go all the way to do another row again. So I'm gonna have to get another piece. So I'm just gonna bat this last row down so that it's with my other rows. But once you're ready to switch, either switch colors or you need the same color but a second piece, you can go ahead and you can leave that tail again. So again, we want just like a finger's length, a couple inches. I'm just gonna snip the end off. We'll just leave these kind of hanging out on the side, and at the end of your weave, when you're all finished, you can tuck those behind your warp strings and they'll get hidden away. But once you're ready to go on to a new color, so maybe I'm gonna switch. I've got this kind of orange, it's like an orangey red, but it's got a little bit of speckles of different colors. So I think it will match and be kind of complementary to my teal. But I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna find the end of this, cut a nice long piece, so about arm's length. And you're just gonna pick up right where you left off. So you wanna just make sure that you're doing the same thing that you were doing before, where you're just going, whatever you did on the last one of that warp string, you're gonna do the other. So my last teal warp string here, this first one, it was under the warp. So now I wanna make sure that my string, that the yarn that I'm starting new is gonna go over this one. So I'm gonna start here, I'm gonna go over, and then I'm gonna go under the next one, and over, and under, over, under. And you're just gonna do the same tabby weave, that plain weave. And then when you get all the way to the end of your loom, you're gonna pull your string again. You wanna make sure that you save a little bit of a tail. And then you just do the same, use your fork or your comb, and you can bat it down. And then remember that tail will just get tucked in at the end. But now you've switched colors and you can keep on going.
You can change colors as many times as you want. Just it depends on what materials that you have available. You can also use lots of different materials to weave with. For instance, I wonder what it would look like if I added paper to my yarn weaving.
That looks really cool, Taylor.
It would be really cool if you knew someone who really liked books or liked to read, and you used a recycled book or a book that maybe you have already read and you aren't going to read again. You use some of the pages to the book to make a weaving, and then you can make a bookmark with your woven book page weaving.
I'm gonna do something similar to what Taylor did, and she added a piece of paper into her weaving. I found these cool little gold twist ties around my house, and I'm gonna try putting just a piece of the twist tie in as one of my weft strings. Adds a little bit of shiny color to it.
Yeah, it's a different texture. Weaving is really such an interesting and cool process because you can do so many variations and so many experiments while you're doing it. And when you're doing plain weave, at least, it's kind of easy to backtrack if you want to. If you don't love how something turned out, you can usually pretty easily kind of take out your last row or your last couple of rows if you're not happy with the way that your project is turning out, and you can kind of revise, go back in, and do what you think looks best. So I don't even know if you guys had noticed, but I had extra of this green string, and I slid the strip of paper down because I didn't want to waste the extra green string that I had left. So I put in a few more rows of the green, and now my green string and my paper string are, I didn't alternate, so I could just slide this paper out and then readjust because I went under first over here on my last pass with my green string. So now I need to go over the blue, under the green, over, under, oops, under, over, nope, gotta go back. There we go.
I'm going to show you guys one cool technique that could add a little bit of texture also. So this is called using knotted string. And so all I did was I took my yarn and I just wanted to make this yarn a little bit thicker and add a little bit of bumpy texture to my weave. So what I did was I took 2 pieces of yarn and I just made sure they were cut the same length and just went ahead and every little bit I made a little knot. And sometimes I would make a double knot so that it was a little bit bigger. So you can see some of my knots are a little bit bigger than the one in the middle. But I just went all the way down my string and every about 1 inch or 2 inches and just added some knots in here. And what that does when we do that with our weaving, we can go ahead and, so again, I'm going to look and see where my last warp or my last weft string went under this warp. So I'm going to start and go over, and I'm going to go over and under and do my same tabby weave with my knotted string this time. And it gets a little bit tricky sometimes because you have to pull through and your knots might get caught. So you might have to help those knots along. But you're just going to go over and under, and we're going to pull our yarn all the way through. Make sure that it doesn't get stuck on any of these knots. It's a little bit of a tricky part.
Mm-hmm. Really love this idea.
And then once you get to the end, you want to leave a tail again, and you can just pull it down, bat it down with your fingers or with your comb or your fork. And then you do the same type of thing, and you just switch your directions and you're going to go over under the opposite ones this time. It just adds a little bit of kind of fun pizzazz to your rows.
Maybe we could also talk about, I'm going to bring back my paper loom and talk about some variations on the tabby weave. So what we were doing here was just the plain tabby weave, but you can change it a little bit if you want some variation. And you could go, if you wanted to start by going over, using your weft string to go over 2 of your warp strings, and then under maybe just 1. Bring it back up to go over 2, under 1, over 2, under 1. So that definitely looks different than my other 2, right? My other 3 rows. So if I do another row of that, what will it look like? So now I'm gonna go under 2. Remember, you always wanna alternate what you previously did. And then over 1, under 2. Sometimes paper is a little tricky to work with. Gotta be very patient. Over 2, or under 2. And then over 1. Interesting. So now that sort of checkerboard is looking different. I'm gonna change the view a little bit.
Definitely looks a little bit wider.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting and a really easy way to kind of change up what your weaving looks like without having to learn any of the more complicated techniques and stitches. Yeah.
And if you wanted to, you could also go under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2. But because I had an odd amount of warp strings, I chose to go over 2, under 1, over 2. So a 2-1 pattern instead of a 2-2 pattern. I think maybe we should talk about some different variations in weaving in general that you could do if you really want to push the limits and sort of experiment with what you can do.
Yeah, if you're feeling pretty comfortable or you want to try something new. So we were just doing our cardboard looms on a big rectangle, but you could do a weaving loom on any different shape. It could be on a circle loom. So we'll share a video with you guys on how to make a circle loom. You could also go on a hunt in your park. Taylor found a really cool stick that she wanted to use.
So I found this is a pretty large stick that was in my yard. But you could definitely use a smaller stick. The key here is to find a branch or a stick that has a Y shape or a V shape to create this sort of natural loom. And here what I used was I had some twine or gardening string and some ribbons that I used to weave, but you don't have to use that. If you want to do a totally natural weaving, you might still need string for your warp, but for your weft, you can sort of scavenge around for any sort of plant material, herbs, wheat, vines, flowers, things that you're interested or you find interesting on a walk that would be able to be woven into your warp strings, which is so cool.
Yeah, you could also find some other materials around the house in addition to just yarn. So Taylor mentioned ribbon. You could use some strips of fabric if you have some, but check with your adult and make sure that it's okay to use that fabric before you cut it up. Or you could use things like twist ties or shoelaces.
So you could also make an entire loom out of sticks. So we've got an extra resource for you that'll show you how to build a loom out of sticks. If you can find some. If you have any area in your neighborhood or in your yard, maybe some branches fall in your yard, you could use those to make your loom, which is really cool too. Kind of makes for a cool wall hanging if you want, or something that you can gift to someone, and pretty easy to make if you've got some string. Yeah.
Taylor mentioned a couple good project ideas. If you're interested in making something that's not just a piece of wall art, you could make a woven necklace or a bracelet. You could try to make a bookmark on your cardboard loom, or you could even do paper weaving and make a placemat for your kitchen table.
Yeah. Did you already show your circle weaving, Allison?
I did, yep. So we've got a circle loom made out of an embroidery hoop. So that's another fun alternative.
Cool. Well, we're so happy that you guys came to hang out with us today and learn about weaving. And we would love to see any work that you create. If you have pictures that you can share, you can tag PGH Kids.
Yeah, get help from your adult. But thanks for joining us and for weaving along. Hope you had fun.